Capitán.
Are you ready to learn the truth about the fall of South America's most powerful empire? A small force of 168 men crossed the ocean and dismantled a government system that controlled millions of subjects across the vast territory of the Andes.
This incredible collapse did not result from technological superiority, but from a series of precise strategic strikes at the very heart of a complex bureaucratic machine.
Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how a handful of adventurers stripped a colossal state of its power and forever changed the map of an entire continent. These 168 men were by no means a professional army in the classical sense of the word. Francisco Pizarro's expedition was a private commercial enterprise where each participant invested their own funds in exchange for a future share of the spoils.
Most of them were artisans, scribes, and small merchants seeking quick riches in uncharted lands.
You will learn how a handful of adventurers overthrew a colossal state and forever changed the map of an entire continent. What if I told you that everything you believed in is a lie? The success of their venture depended on strict internal discipline and a willingness to risk everything for the common goal. They moved along the winding mountain trails of the Andes, completely cut off from supply bases and any possible support. Every step deeper into foreign territory raised the stakes, turning the expedition into a one-way ticket. There was simply no turning back for these men, which made them extremely determined. Before them lay an empire crisscrossed by a network of perfect stone roads and bridges. This infrastructure, created by the Incas to rapidly deploy their troops, paradoxically accelerated the advance of the conquistadors themselves. The Spaniards used the logistical achievements of others to rapidly penetrate deep into the continent. They marched along paved roads, bypassing deep gorges and impassable cliffs. The conquistadors carefully studied the political situation, gathering information about internal conflicts within the empire. They quickly realized that the vast state had recently endured a massive internal power struggle. A divided society was vulnerable, and the Spaniards planned to exploit these divisions to their advantage. The ability to analyze information became their main advantage in the early stages. The expedition was constantly on the move, covering vast distances in high-altitude terrain. The thin air and steep ascents exhausted the men, but Pizarro demanded they maintain a brisk pace.
Stopping would mean losing the initiative and giving the Incas a chance to organize resistance.
Moving forward was the only way to maintain control of the situation. Soon the expedition reached the outskirts of Cajamarca, where Emperor Atahualpa's headquarters were located. A vast camp of Inca warriors stretched out around the city, their tents covering all the surrounding hills. The scale of the enemy's forces became clear, and it was already too late to retreat. The tension reached its peak, demanding immediate and decisive action. At that moment, Pizarro made a decision that forever changed the course of world history.
He gambled on audacity, deciding to strike at the very heart of the enemy's forces.
I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about such risky decisions in desperate situations? Share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about is that the Battle of Cajamarca was not a classic battle at all. It was a carefully planned operation to neutralize the single decision-making center of a vast empire. The Spaniards had taken up positions in advance in enclosed spaces around the city's main square. They waited for the moment when the Inca ruler would be in his most vulnerable position. Atahualpa arrived at the square accompanied by a huge entourage and the state's highest dignitaries. The square quickly filled with thousands of people, confident in their absolute safety. The Inca ruler felt invulnerable, surrounded by his loyal servants.
None of them suspected that the trap had already snapped shut.
The conquistadors quickly established control over the city and consolidated their positions. They understood that their lives now depended entirely on the safety of the noble captive. Atahualpa was placed under strict guard, but he was allowed to continue giving orders to his subjects. In this way, the Spaniards began to rule the empire through others. News of the ruler's capture spread rapidly to every corner of the vast empire. Regional governors were at a loss. not knowing whom to obey. The messaging system functioned smoothly, but conveyed only the orders of a paralyzed central authority. The Inca information network became a tool in the hands of the conquistadors. The Spaniards skillfully maintained the illusion that Atahualpa still ruled his country. They allowed dignitaries to visit the captive and receive orders from him. However, all these decisions were carefully controlled by Pizarro and his entourage. The empire continued to function by inertia, unaware of the change in actual leadership. At this point, an unprecedented plan began to take shape to extract maximum benefit from the situation.
The conquistadors assessed the region's wealth and decided to convert the captive's power into material assets.
They began negotiations on the terms of his release, setting outrageous demands. The stakes rose with each passing day, bringing the climax closer. Atahualpa himself offered a huge ransom, underestimating the true motives of his captors. He believed that the foreigners would leave once they received the desired amount of valuables. The captive hoped to buy his way out of the impending catastrophe. Do you think it was possible to save the state while held captive by one's own enemy? I will reveal the best-kept secret of that time concerning an incredible collection of treasures. The Inca ruler promised to fill a huge room to the ceiling with objects made of yellow metal. To fulfill this promise, the full might of the Inca state bureaucracy was mobilized. The Spaniards could only watch as the empire depleted itself to save a single man. Orders from Cajamarca flew to all the provinces, demanding the immediate shipment of valuables to the capital. Temples and palaces across the country were stripped of their ornaments, which had been accumulated in treasuries for centuries. The state logistics system functioned flawlessly, delivering cargo along perfect roads.
All the conquistadors had to do was receive the arriving caravans and store the spoils.
Atahualpa continued to rule the state while confined to a cramped room. He ordered the elimination of his main political rival to maintain his monopoly on power. The Spaniards allowed him to do so, using others' hands to eliminate yet another potential threat. The empire's political landscape was being cleared in the interests of a small group of invaders. The collection of the ransom continued for several months, depleting the resources of the remote provinces. Every day, new shipments arrived in Cajamarca, astonishing the Europeans. They had never seen such a vast amount of valuables gathered in one place. However, greed would not allow them to stop there. Soon, the room was filled to the agreed-upon level, and the deal was formally completed. The Incas expected that their ruler would then receive his long-awaited freedom. The state apparatus had functioned perfectly, accomplishing the most ambitious task in its history. But the rules of the game were set by those who held control over the situation. Pizarro convened a council to decide the future fate of the state and its leader.
It was decided that the ruler's release was incompatible with plans for complete control over the Andes.
The Spaniards fabricated a formal pretext for the final removal of the supreme authority. The fate of the Inca Empire was sealed within a small circle of the expedition's commanders. The Spaniards cold-bloodedly removed the obstacle standing in the way of their goal. The elimination of Atahualpa became the final act in the collapse of centralized rule. A vast state suddenly lost its leader and plunged into a state of deep shock. Appreciate the scale of this historical catastrophe and be sure to like this video. Are you ready for the shocking truth about this campaign? After eliminating the legitimate ruler, the conquistadors encountered no united front of resistance on their way to the capital. On the contrary, many local leaders viewed the Spaniards as liberators from the dictatorship of the central government. Pizarro skillfully played on these contradictions, winning over thousands of allies. The road to Cusco was open, and the expedition began a rapid advance into the heart of the Andes. They crossed high mountain passes, controlling the empire's key transportation hubs. The Spaniards moved not as conquerors, but as a new political force coming into its own. The local infrastructure once again served them well. On the way to the capital, there were sporadic skirmishes with the remnants of government-loyal forces. However, without a unified command, these units acted in a disorganized and ineffective manner. The Spaniards easily defeated them, exploiting their tactical superiority and the element of surprise. Resistance crumbled before their eyes, lacking any internal support. In the city, the process of redistributing power and resources among the expedition's participants began. Each received their share depending on their contribution to the common cause. This process was accompanied by internal disputes and conflicts, but strict discipline prevailed. The main task was to maintain control over the vast metropolis. The puppet ruler carried out all orders, ensuring the smooth operation of the infrastructure. Food was delivered from warehouses, and the streets were patrolled by local law enforcement. Life in the city seemed calm, but it was merely the calm before the storm. Tension was building in society with no outlet. The Spaniards began sending small detachments to remote provinces to consolidate their success. They were convinced that the empire had been definitively broken and was incapable of mounting an organized response. This overconfidence soon played a cruel trick on them. The situation was on the verge of a turning point. The new order proved too fragile. Control over the capital did not yet mean control over the minds of millions of people. Deep discontent was brewing among the local aristocracy, deprived of real power. Are you ready to learn how a single spark set the entire empire ablaze? The first months of rule from Cusco created a false impression of complete stability. The Spaniards were settling into their new lives, introducing European customs into the ancient capital. They appointed their own administrators to oversee tax collection and the distribution of resources. The puppet government dutifully served as a screen for the real power. Pizarro set off for the coast to found a new city and establish maritime trade. He left a small garrison in Cusco under the command of his trusted men. This division of forces proved to be a serious strategic miscalculation, weakening control over the capital. The remaining conquistadors felt completely secure. Meanwhile, the new Inca ruler, Manco Inca, began to realize his true situation. He understood that he was being used merely as a tool to extract resources from the country. His authority among his own people was rapidly declining due to constant concessions to the foreigners. The ruler's pride demanded decisive action to restore sovereignty. Manco Inca began secretly gathering information on the strength and location of Spanish forces. He used his communication channels to coordinate actions with distant provinces. The messaging system that had worked for the Spaniards now began to work against them. A conspiracy was brewing right in the heart of the capital, right under the invaders' noses. After leaving the capital, the Inca ruler immediately set about implementing his plan. He appealed to the people to throw off the yoke of foreign rule. His words fell on fertile ground amid widespread discontent with the new regime. Thousands of people responded to the call of their rightful leader. Within days, a massive army gathered around Manco Inca, ready for a decisive battle. They blocked all roads leading to the capital, cutting off the Spanish garrison from the outside world. The illusion of control collapsed overnight, exposing the harsh reality. Cusco found itself in a tight ring of isolation. Overconfidence turned into a deadly trap. A small detachment of conquistadors inside the city suddenly realized the scale of the impending catastrophe. They found themselves trapped in a stone bag, surrounded by a sea of hostile people. The balance of power had shifted dramatically in just a few days. What if everything you were taught is outdated? The Spaniards were accustomed to quick victories over disorganized groups, but now they faced a massive, coordinated army. Manco Inca didn't just gather a crowd, he organized a siege according to all the rules of military strategy. Hundreds of camps sprang up on the mountain slopes around Cusco, completely blocking any maneuver. The Incas used the rugged terrain to create impregnable positions. They built barricades in the narrow streets, depriving the conquistadors of their main advantage, the mobility of their cavalry. The city turned into a confusing labyrinth where every turn held mortal danger. The rebels methodically tightened the noose, capturing block by block. The besieged found themselves facing a severe shortage of food and resources. All external supplies were cut off, and internal warehouses were rapidly emptying. Water also became scarce as the Incas blocked the ancient canals that fed the capital. The Spaniards found themselves trapped in a trap of their own making. The rebels employed a tactic of constant psychological pressure. Day and night, the mountains echoed with the sounds of horns and drums, giving the besieged not a moment's peace. This sonic assault wore down the nervous system, robbing people of sleep and the ability to think rationally. The fear of imminent death became a constant companion for the garrison. Manco Inca personally led the operation, directing attacks at the most vulnerable points. Panic and conflict broke out within the garrison amid exhaustion. Commanders tried to maintain discipline through harsh measures, but despair took hold. The situation seemed hopeless, and many were already preparing for the worst possible outcome. It was a moment of near total collapse for the expedition. At this critical moment, the besieged forces made a desperate attempt to capture the strategically important fortress overlooking the city. This operation became the climax of the siege, requiring the maximum concentration of forces. They understood that without control of the high ground, holding the city would be impossible. The stakes were raised to the absolute maximum. There was nowhere to retreat. Every warrior understood the cost of a possible defeat. The outcome of this operation would determine the fate of the entire continent. Guess what happened next in this desperate struggle for survival? The siege of Cusco reached its peak, turning the ancient capital into an arena of relentless conflict. Capturing the commanding heights demanded an incredible mobilization of all the Spaniards of strength. They methodically stormed the stone terraces, advancing meter by meter. Control of the fortress offered a slim chance to continue the resistance. However, taking the high ground did not lift the general blockade of the city. Manco Inca's army continued to hold all the approaches, not allowing the garrison to relax for a single second. The strategic stalemate persisted, exhausting both sides of the conflict. Time was working against the besieged, whose supplies were nearing absolute zero. During this period, the Incas carried out a large-scale strategic maneuver, launching an offensive along the coast. They planned to destroy the Spaniards' new settlements to deprive them of support from the sea. This operation demonstrated the global scale of the uprising. Manco Inca sought to rid the entire territory of his country of foreigners. The attack on Lima, Pizarro's new city, became a serious test for Spanish logistics. The conquistadors had to fight on two fronts, separated by hundreds of kilometers of treacherous mountain trails. The communication system between the units had been completely destroyed by Inca guerrillas. Each garrison was forced to fend for itself. The Spaniards in Cusco sensed the pressure easing and began cautious sorties. They re-established control over the immediate surroundings, securing food and fodder. The ring of encirclement gradually broke down into separate pockets of resistance. The crisis had passed, but the consequences of the siege were catastrophic. Manco Inca was forced to withdraw his main forces to inaccessible mountainous regions. He maintained his command structure, but lost the initiative in the conflict. The capital remained in the hands of the foreigners, albeit at the cost of incredible effort. The uprising entered a protracted guerrilla phase. Both armies needed to regroup. This turning point exposed the vulnerability of both sides. The Spaniards realized that their power hung by a thread, while the Incas understood that they could not crush the enemy in a single blow. The War of the Andes entered a new, even more grueling phase. Immediately after the siege was lifted, the Spanish faced a completely different, insurmountable force. A wave of demographic collapse, brought from across the ocean, swept across the continent. This threat spread faster than any army, encountering no obstacles in its path. The ancient Inca roads became ideal transport arteries for this invisible force. Entire provinces suddenly emptied, leaving behind only the silent stone ruins of cities. The vast terraces that had fed millions of people were overgrown with grass due to a lack of labor. The complex administrative system lost its main resource, human capital. The empire crumbled from within, losing its ability to reproduce. This process unfolded rapidly and ruthlessly, shifting the balance of power on the continent. The Incas could not comprehend the nature of what was happening, attributing it to the wrath of the gods. Traditional medicine and religious rituals proved utterly powerless. Fear of the unknown paralyzed society more effectively than the army of the conquistadors. This invisible devastation played a decisive role in the Spaniards' final consolidation of power. They gained vast territories at their disposal without the need for large-scale military operations. The invaders filled the resulting vacuum with their own rules and institutions. The old world was being wiped off the face of the earth at an alarming rate. The Inca communication network ceased to exist entirely. Messages were no longer delivered, as there was no one left to run along the mountain trails. The continental communication system fell into complete silence. Each region was left to face its own fate. The uprising had lost its momentum, devolving into localized skirmishes between small bands. Manco Inca continued his struggle, but it was the resistance of the doomed. He established a new independent state in the jungle, but it was merely a shadow of its former glory. The main territory was already under the control of the new rulers. The old world was gone forever. The demographic catastrophe achieved what the conquistadors' swords and guns could not. It broke the backbone of a colossal civilization, paving the way for a complete reshaping of the continent. The Andes had entered a new historical era. Against the backdrop of depopulated territories, the process of fragmentation within the conquistadors' own power structure began. The disappearance of the external threat laid bare deep contradictions within the victors' ranks. Disputes over the division of spoils and territorial claims escalated into open conflict. Yesterday's comrades in arms became bitter enemies in the struggle for control over the ruins of the empire. Pizarro and his commanders launched a civil war that finally destroyed what remained of stability. They formed their own armies, drawing the local population to their side. The Incas found themselves dragged into the internal conflict of their conquerors as cannon fodder. The chaos of governance reached its absolute peak. The establishment of a rigid vertical power structure from across the ocean signaled the final integration of the Andes into the global imperial system. Local governing institutions were completely dismantled and replaced with European counterparts. The territory was divided into new administrative units. Ancient borders and spheres of influence lost their meaning forever. The remnants of the independent Inca state in Vilcabamba survived for several more decades. They were in deep isolation, posing no serious threat to the new authorities. Their existence was largely symbolic, a reminder of past greatness. The Spaniards methodically prepared for the final elimination of this enclave. The final military operation against the last Inca stronghold was carried out with cold efficiency. Well-armed units broke through the jungle defenses and captured the city. The last independent leader was captured and taken to the former capital. This event put an end to the long-standing conflict. The elimination of the last symbol of resistance took place in Cusco, in the very square where the greatest decisions had once been made. This act was symbolic, demonstrating the absolute power of the metropolis. The Inca state apparatus was definitively and irrevocably dismantled. Only stone ruins remained of it. Former independence became nothing more than a legend. The fragmentation of the old order culminated in the creation of a new, rigidly structured reality. The Spaniards built their system on the ruins of the Inca infrastructure, using it to extract resources. The continent entered a long period of complete subjugation to an external center of control. The collapse of the Inca Empire was one of the most significant geopolitical shifts in world history. A state that had been built over centuries was destroyed in a single historical moment by a small group of determined individuals. This process demonstrated just how vulnerable a highly centralized system can be in the face of an unconventional external influence. The blow to the single decision-making center proved fatal to the entire structure. The consequences of this collapse changed not only South America, but also the global economy. Huge flows of looted valuables poured into Europe, triggering massive financial upheavals. This transfer of resources set in motion processes that shaped the development of global trade for centuries to come. The ruins of one civilization became the foundation for the economic rise of another. A complete change in the ruling elites led to a transformation of the social structure. The local aristocracy was stripped of its influence and relegated to the lower rungs of the new hierarchy. Control of the territories passed to officials appointed from across the ocean. This system cemented deep social stratification for centuries to come. The mechanism of subjugation operated coldly and methodically, leaving no room for compromise. The invaders did not merely change the flag, they completely rewrote the rules of the game on the continent. Every action was subject to the strict logic of maximizing profit. Emotions and doubts gave way to pragmatic administration. The events of those years became a classic example of the total collapse of a complex system. They demonstrated that numerical superiority is no guarantee of a state's survival. The decisive factor was the ability to adapt to sudden changes and make independent decisions in a crisis. The rigid hierarchy of the Incas deprived them of this ability. The history of Pizarro's expedition remains a stark testament to ambition, calculation, and incredible coincidences. 168 men served as the catalyst for a process that wiped a colossal empire off the map. Their actions set off a chain reaction that could no longer be stopped. It was the triumph of cold calculation over monumental immobility. The landscapes of the Andes still bear the memory of that grand catastrophe. Empty terraces and cyclopean masonry serve as a silent reminder of the fragility of all greatness. The fall of the empire became a lesson whose relevance has not faded with time. The scale of this event will forever remain in humanity's historical memory. The history of the conquest of the Andes demonstrates how quickly even the most robust state system can collapse. It is a harsh lesson that the sustainability of a civilization depends on its ability to respond to unforeseen challenges. What other major historical collapses would you like to explore in our upcoming videos? Be sure to share your suggestions in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes.